Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The quantum meridian wasn't supposed to find anything in the void sector. The name alone should have been a hint. Void, as in empty, as in nothing worth mentioning for about 16 light-years in any direction. The Galactic Union had sent their finest science vessel out here on what amounted to a very expensive wild goose chase, scanning for anomalies that probably didn't exist. Spoiler alert, they existed. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, you need to understand that the quantum meridian was the sort of ship that made other vessels weep with inadequacy. State-of-the-art, bleeding-edge technology, sensors so sensitive they could pick up a whisper in a supernova. The crew was equally impressive, hand-picked specialists from across the Union, each one an expert in their field. And then there was James. James was human, which already made him an oddity on a ship full of exotic alien life forms. He was also a mechanic, which made him essential. And he was also very much not supposed to be on this expedition, which made him, well, let's call it an amusing footnote in what would become a very interesting logbook. The original engineer had called in sick, something about Andromedan flu, which apparently made you shed your exoskeleton prematurely, and nobody wanted that happening in the ship's ventilation system. James had been available, qualified enough, and, most importantly, willing to sign the waiver without reading it. The Galactic Union appreciated that kind of blind optimism. Right now, James was doing what he did best, fixing things that shouldn't have broken in the first place. He was wedged into a maintenance shaft that clearly hadn't been designed with human proportions in mind, wrestling with a cooling valve that had decided to seize up at the least convenient moment possible. "Come on, you stubborn piece of—" The ship's alarm cut him off mid-profanity. It wasn't a gentle alarm, either. No polite beeping or soft chimes. This was the kind of alarm that suggested imminent disaster, cosmic horror, or, at minimum, something really weird happening. James extracted himself from the shaft, cracking his head on the access panel because the universe demanded a laugh track. He rubbed the growing bump on his skull and listened as the intercom crackled to life. Willix's voice filled the corridor, musical, crystalline, like someone playing a glass harmonica underwater. "All personnel to observation deck. Captain Vunkala requires immediate attendance." The navigator always sounded slightly otherworldly, which made sense given that she was literally made of sentient crystal. James had once asked her what music sounded like to her species. She'd responded with a frequency that shattered his coffee mug. Communication barriers. You know how it is. James grabbed his tool belt and made his way through the ship's corridors, passing junction points and crew quarters that hummed with the steady thrum of the engines. The Quantum Meridian was a beautiful ship. He'd give it that, even if half the doorways seemed designed to give him a concussion. The observation deck was already crowded when he arrived. Captain Vunkala stood at the center viewport, their chitinous frame reflecting the starlight in ways that made geometry look negotiable. The captain was insectoid, with compound eyes that saw in spectrums James couldn't even pronounce, and a mind that worked in calculations and probabilities. They were also, in James's humble opinion, wound tighter than a spring in a watch factory. Beside the captain stood Helmix, the science officer. Helmix was amphibious, his skin a shifting palette of blues and greens that changed with his mood. Right now, those colors were doing something between concerned and deeply unsettled, which wasn't exactly reassuring. "Ah, James," Helmix said, his voice bubbling slightly. "Good. We need all perspectives on this." "All perspectives on what?" James asked, moving to join them at the viewport. That's when he saw it. The thing, and really thing, was the most accurate descriptor available, hung in space like a splinter of midnight given form. It was an obelisk, obsidian black, and impossibly smooth, easily the size of a skyscraper but somehow more intimidating. It didn't reflect light so much as consume it, creating a void in the star field that made James's eyes hurt if he looked at it too long. "Well," James said slowly, "that's new." "New is an understatement," Willix chimed, her crystalline form refracting the dim observation deck, lighting into rainbow patterns. "This structure predates most known civilizations. Our scans suggest it's been here for, well, let's just say, a very, very long time." Captain Von Kalla's mandibles clicked together in what James had learned was their version of a thoughtful hum. "We detected it approximately 20 minutes ago. It appeared to activate upon our approach. Energy signatures consistent with scanning technology." "Scanning us?" James raised an eyebrow. "Friendly scanning, or the kind that comes before laser beams?" "Unknown," Helmix admitted, his skin flickering to a nervous yellow. "But it has begun broadcasting a signal. Universal mathematical language, actually. Quite elegant." "What's it saying?" "That's the interesting part," the science officer continued, manipulating a holographic display that sprang to life between them. "It appears to be issuing a challenge. Enter the structure, retrieve an artifact it calls the Core of Ascension, and gain access to knowledge from the civilization that built it." James whistled low. "Ancient alien knowledge. That's either really good or really bad, with basically no middle ground." "Astute observation," Von Kalla said, and James couldn't tell if that was sarcasm. The captain's species didn't really do sarcasm, or humor, or anything that wasn't carefully calculated efficiency. However, there's a complication. Of course there was. There was always a complication. Helmix tapped the holographic display, and new information cascaded across the screen. "The Obelisk has provided survival probability calculations for each crew member, based on biological scans, psychological profiles, and factors we're still trying to understand." The display showed the crew manifest alongside percentages. Captain Von Kalla, 92% survival probability. Helmix, 81%. Willix, 68%, which made sense given that she was made of crystal and therefore fragile despite her brilliance. Other crew members ranged between 65% and 88%. And then there was James. James, 0.02% survival probability. The human stared at his readout for a long moment. Then he started laughing. 0%, he said between chuckles. "Not even a little bit? Not even 0.01%? "The calculation appears definitive," Von Kalla said, their tone unreadable, "which is why you will obviously not be part of any expedition into that structure." "Hang on," James said, his laughter dying down, but a grin still plastered across his face. "You're telling me this ancient supercomputer looked at me and went, 'Yeah, that one's definitely gonna die'?" "In so many words, yes." "So you're saying there's a challenge involved?" Helmix's skin went full alarm orange. "James, this is not a matter of pride or proving something. The Obelisk's calculations are based on technologies far beyond our understanding. If it says 0%, then it doesn't know humans very well," James interrupted, still grinning. "Because 0% just means nobody's done it yet. And I've always wanted to be the first to do something monumentally stupid." Captain Von Kalla's antennae twitched. "This is precisely the kind of reckless attitude that likely contributed to your 0% rating." "Probably," James admitted cheerfully. "But here's the thing, Captain. I once had a teacher tell me I had 0% chance of passing her class. I got a B-. I had a mechanic tell me a shuttle engine had 0% chance of restarting. Started it with a wrench and some creative wiring. And I had a doctor tell me I had 0% chance of surviving a bar fight with a Grendelian. How did that end? Willix asked, genuinely curious. I didn't fight him. I bought him a drink instead. We're friends now. His name is Gorth. He sends me holiday cards. James shrugged. My point is, 0% has never really stopped me before. The captain's compound eyes seemed to study James with new intensity. You understand that this is not a joke. The Obelisk is offering knowledge, yes, but it's also presenting a gauntlet. Civilizations have likely tried and failed. Sure, James said. But were any of them human? There was a long pause. Space continued being space outside the viewport. The Obelisk continued being ominous and inscrutable. Finally, Helmix spoke up. He does raise an interesting point. Humanity is not well represented in the Obelisk's databases. It's possible the calculations are based on incomplete data. Or, Vuncala countered, the calculations are entirely accurate, and this human will perish immediately upon entry. Only one way to find out, James said, and that grin was back, wider than before. Captain Vuncala's mandibles clicked in rapid succession, a sign of deep contemplation or possibly frustration. With them, it was hard to tell. I cannot, in good conscience, allow a crew member to walk into certain death. Then it's a good thing it's not certain, James replied. It's 0%, which is different from impossible. Impossible doesn't have a percentage. This does, and percentages can be wrong. Willix's crystalline structure hummed softly. His logic is simultaneously flawed and oddly compelling. That's humanity in a nutshell, James said proudly. The captain stared at James for what felt like an eternity. Then, with what might have been a sigh, though it sounded more like air escaping from a hydraulic press, they spoke. Against my better judgment, and with the caveat that I am noting this decision in the official log as inadvisable, I will permit an exploratory team to enter the Obelisk. They held up one chitinous appendage before James could celebrate. However, you will not go alone. Helmix will accompany you, as will Willix and myself. If this is a death trap, we face it as a crew. James blinked. That's actually pretty noble, Captain. It's logical, Vuncala corrected. If the Obelisk's knowledge is genuine, it benefits the entire Union. And if you're going to do something catastrophically foolish, someone should be there to document exactly how foolish it was. I'll take it, James said, extending his hand. The captain looked at it for a moment before carefully grasping it with one of their smaller limbs. Human handshakes still baffled most aliens, but Vuncala was trying. Helmix was already running additional scans, his webbed fingers dancing across holographic controls. I'm detecting an entrance port on the structure's lower quadrant. Atmosphere inside reads as... well, it reads as breathable for all of us, which is suspicious in itself. Suspicious how? James asked. Suspicious as in it seems to be adapting its internal environment to match our requirements, which suggests either remarkable hospitality or a trap, Willix finished, her tone like wind chimes in a minor key. Let's go with hospitality, James suggested. I'm an optimist. You have a 0% survival rating, the captain pointed out. Exactly. Nowhere to go but up. The next 30 minutes were a flurry of preparation. The crew suited up. Well, those who needed suits. Willix didn't breathe in any conventional sense, and Captain Vuncala's exoskeleton was basically built-in armor. Helmix wore a light environmental suit that regulated his moisture levels, and James wore his usual coveralls with some extra patches for the holes. You're not wearing protective gear, Helmix asked, his skin flickering to concerned yellow. Again. "This is protective gear," James said, patting his coveralls. "Protected me through 3 engine failures, 2 hull breaches, and 1 incident with a malfunctioning food synthesizer that we don't talk about." "That's not—" "Relax, Helmix. I've got my tools, I've got my wits, and I've got approximately 0% chance of survival. I'm basically invincible." The science officer looked to Captain Vuncala for support, but the captain just made that hydraulic sigh sound again. They took a shuttle across the short distance to the Obelisk. As they approached, the structure seemed to grow larger, more imposing, more impossible. Its surface was perfectly smooth, without seam or joint, as if the entire thing had been carved from a single piece of the universe's darkest shadow. Then, as if sensing their arrival, a doorway opened. Not slid open, not iris opened, just appeared. One moment there was solid surface, the next there was an entrance, glowing with soft blue light that seemed to beckon them inside. "Well," James said, unbuckling his harness, "that's not ominous at all." "I'm updating my survival estimate to negative percentages," Helmix muttered. "Can't have negative survival," James pointed out. "That's just being dead before you start." "Yes," the science officer said flatly. "Exactly." They disembarked from the shuttle and stood before the entrance. Up close, the obelisk's surface seemed to shift and flow, though whether it was actually moving or just playing tricks on their eyes was impossible to tell. Captain Vuncala stepped forward first, because that's what captains did. "For the record, I believe this is inadvisable." "Noted," James said. "Let's be inadvisable together." And with that, they crossed the threshold. The universe, watching from its cosmic armchair with a bowl of popcorn, leaned forward with interest. This was about to get good. The inside of the obelisk was, in a word, wrong. Not wrong in the sense of being broken or malfunctioning. Wrong in the sense that physics took one look at what was happening in here and decided to take a personal day. Corridors bent at angles that shouldn't exist. Gravity seemed to be more of a suggestion than a law. At one point, James watched Helmix walk on what he was pretty sure was the ceiling, except the ceiling was also the floor, and his brain was filing a formal complaint about the whole situation. "This is architecturally impossible," Captain Vuncala stated, their antennae twitching in what James had learned was deep confusion. Coming from a species that navigated by quantum mathematics, that was saying something. "Impossible seems to be the theme," Willix chimed, her crystalline form refracting the strange blue light that emanated from the walls. "I'm detecting spatial distortions that suggest non-Euclidean geometry. We may be experiencing multiple dimensions simultaneously." "In English?" James asked. "Space is folded like origami made by someone having a seizure." "Got it. Thanks." They moved deeper into the structure, following a corridor that seemed to stretch longer the more they walked. The walls were covered in symbols that shifted and changed, rearranging themselves as if alive. Helmix kept stopping to scan them, his skin cycling through colors that suggested academic excitement mixed with existential dread. "These markings," the science officer said, webbed fingers hovering over a particularly complex pattern. "They're not just decorative. They're adaptive algorithms. The structure is learning from us as we move through it." "Learning what?" James asked, though he had a feeling he knew the answer. "How to kill us, most likely." "Optimism, Helmix. Try some." "I'm amphibious, not suicidal." The first challenge appeared without warning, which seemed to be the obelisk's preferred method of operation. One moment, they were walking through a corridor. The next moment, the corridor opened into a vast chamber, and the moment after that, the chamber sealed behind them with a sound like the universe's largest door slamming shut. Well, James said into the silence that followed, that's not great. The chamber was enormous, easily the size of a cargo bay, and completely empty except for a single doorway on the far side. Between them and the door, however, was a problem. A big, gaseous, highly toxic problem. Warning symbols materialized on the walls, universal pictographs that transcended language, and basically screamed, "This will kill you in ways that are both painful and embarrassing." Helmix ran a quick scan, and his skin went from concerned yellow to full panic purple. The atmosphere in this chamber is laced with compounds specifically designed to be lethal to human biology. We're talking cellular breakdown on contact, respiratory failure within seconds, the works. How lethal are we talking? James asked. If you breathe it, you'll be dead before you finish inhaling. So, pretty lethal. Catastrophically lethal. Captain Vunkala's compound eyes swiveled to examine the chamber. The rest of us should be fine. Our respiratory systems are either incompatible with the toxin or sufficiently robust to handle it. This appears to be a human-specific deterrent. How thoughtful, James muttered, studying the distance to the far door. Maybe 60 meters. 60 meters of certain death between him and progress. You know what? I can hold my breath for about 2 minutes on a good day. The distance is too far, Vunkala stated. Even at a full sprint, you wouldn't make it. Then I'd better sprint really, really fast. Helmix's skin went full strobe light panic. James, this is suicide. The Obelisk calculated your survival at 0% for exactly this reason. It knows how to kill humans specifically. Yeah, but here's the thing, James said, already pulling off his jacket. I'm stubborn, and I didn't come all this way to turn around at the first sign of deadly neurotoxin. He wrapped the jacket around his face, tying the sleeves behind his head like the world's most dangerous fashion statement. Besides, I've got a secret weapon. What secret weapon? Willix asked. Duct tape. From his tool belt, because of course James carried duct tape in his tool belt, he produced a roll of the Silver Miracle adhesive and proceeded to seal every gap between his jacket and his skin. Around his neck, across his nose, anywhere air might sneak in. The other crew members watched this process with what could only be described as horrified fascination. This is your plan? Captain Vunkala asked. Duct tape? Humanity's greatest invention, James said, his voice muffled through the jacket. Fixed the Apollo 13. Can fix my breathing problem, probably. He took several deep breaths, hyperventilating to load up on oxygen. Okay, I've got this. Just a light jog through certain death. Normal day, really. James. But James was already running. He hit the toxic atmosphere at full sprint, and immediately every instinct in his body started screaming. The air around him shimmered with chemical wrongness, and even through the jacket he could feel the burn of it trying to get in. His eyes watered, his skin prickled, his lungs started demanding air with increasing urgency. 30 meters. His vision started to blur. 40 meters. His legs felt like they were made of lead and bad decisions. 50 meters. His lungs were actively filing a lawsuit against his brain. 60 meters. James hit the door with his shoulder, hard enough to bruise, and it opened. Thank whatever ancient aliens built this thing. And he tumbled through into clean air, gasping and ripping the duct tape and jacket away from his face. He lay there for a moment, breathing hard, while his crew members ran through the chamber with considerably less drama and joined him on the other side. That, Helmix said, his skin a shocked white, was the single most reckless thing I've ever witnessed. Thanks, James wheezed. I try. Captain Vunkala helped him to his feet. You realize you just survived something the Obelisk predicted would kill you. Yeah, well, the Obelisk didn't account for duct tape. Rookie mistake. They continued through the structure and the challenges kept coming. Each one seemed specifically designed to exploit particular species' weaknesses, which made sense if this whole thing was a test. What didn't make sense was how James kept surviving them. The second challenge was a gravity well, a room where the gravitational force increased exponentially toward the center. The goal was simple: reach the control panel in the middle and deactivate it. The problem was equally simple. Anything with a skeletal structure would be crushed flat long before reaching the center. Captain Vuncala tested it first, using a probe. The probe made it about 3 meters before being compressed into something roughly the size of a marble. This is designed to eliminate species with internal or external skeletal frameworks, the captain said. Essentially, anyone who isn't a puddle. What about you? James asked Helmix. The amphibious scientist shook his head. I have a skeletal structure. It's flexible, but not that flexible. I'd be paste. James studied the room, then the control panel glowing in the center. Then he sighed. You know, I really should have gone into accounting like my mother wanted. You're not seriously. Already am. James stepped into the gravity well and immediately felt like someone had dropped a planet on his shoulders. Then 2 planets. Then a small solar system. His knees buckled, his spine compressed, and every bone in his body started composing resignation letters. But here's the thing about humans, and this is important, so pay attention. Humans are persistence hunters. Back on Earth, back before cities and technology and duct tape, humans chased prey until the prey literally died of exhaustion. Humans don't give up. They don't know how. It's not in the programming. James pushed forward. One step, another. His vision grayed at the edges. His skeleton was having a very animated discussion about union rights and workplace safety. But he kept moving. This is insane, Helmix whispered from the doorway. He's going to die. He should have died in the last room, Willix pointed out. Yet he persists. Stubbornly, Vuncala added, and there might have been a hint of admiration in their voice. James reached the control panel, or rather, he fell onto the control panel, because standing was no longer a viable option. His hand, shaking from the pressure, slapped at the controls until something beeped, and the gravity well disengaged. He lay there for a moment, spread out like a particularly exhausted starfish, breathing hard. Still alive, he called out weakly. Mostly. Some assembly required. The crew rushed in to help him up. James's bones felt like they'd been rearranged by an angry masseuse, but he was walking, mostly. Your species is either incredibly resilient or incredibly stupid, Captain Vuncala observed. Why not both? The third challenge appeared as they entered another chamber, this one with walls covered in complex mathematical equations. A door at the far end remained sealed, and above it, a display showed a problem that needed solving, an equation in base 18 mathematics that would make most supercomputers weep. Helmix immediately set to work, his scientific mind engaging with the problem. This is fascinating. The equation requires simultaneous calculation across multiple dimensional matrices, accounting for quantum fluctuations, and... James walked up to the door and kicked it. The door opened. There was a moment of profound silence. "Did you just..." Willix began, her tone approaching something like awe. "Did you just bypass a complex mathematical lock by kicking it?" "Percussive maintenance," James said cheerfully, stepping through. "Works on everything from engines to ancient alien doors. You coming?" Helmix's skin cycled through about 15 different colors, none of which had names in any known language. That's not... You can't just... The mathematics alone? And yet, James said, gesturing to the open door. Captain Von Kalla's mandibles clicked rapidly. I'm beginning to understand why the Obelisk couldn't calculate your survival odds. Yeah? You don't follow any logical pattern. You're essentially random chance given physical form. I'll take that as a compliment. They pressed deeper into the Obelisk, and with each challenge, a pattern emerged. Or rather, a lack of pattern. The structure kept presenting obstacles designed for logical, predictable species, and James kept solving them in ways that made logic cry in a corner. A maze designed to trap those who relied on mapping algorithms? James picked a direction and stuck with it until he found the exit. A riddle that required understanding ancient linguistic structures? James guessed. A pressure-sensitive floor that required precise weight distribution? James hopped across it on one foot, while humming. By the time they reached the central chamber, Helmix's skin had settled on a color best described as intellectually exhausted beige, and Captain Von Kalla's antennae were twitching in a way that suggested their entire worldview was being fundamentally challenged. Your species, the captain said slowly, approaches problem-solving like a meteor approaches a planet, with absolute commitment and no regard for structural integrity. That's beautiful, Captain. You should write poetry. That wasn't a compliment. I'm choosing to interpret it as one. Willix had been quiet for most of the journey, but now she spoke up, her voice chiming with something that might have been concern. The central chamber is ahead. Whatever's in there, it will be the Obelisk's final challenge, the most dangerous one. Naturally, James said, cracking his knuckles. Wouldn't be dramatic otherwise. They stood before a massive doorway, easily 10 meters tall, covered in the same shifting symbols that adorned the rest of the structure. As they approached, the symbols began to glow, brightening until the entire door was luminous with ancient power. Then it opened, and light spilled out like liquid sunshine. And from somewhere deep inside, a voice spoke. Not in any particular language, but in a way that bypassed language entirely and spoke directly to understanding. You should not have made it this far. Recalculating. James grinned. Yeah, I get that a lot. The door stood open before them, and beyond it, the core of ascension awaited, along with, undoubtedly, something terrible designed to kill them all in creative ways. Well, James said, stepping forward, let's go disappoint some ancient algorithms. And into the heart of the Obelisk they went, while the universe leaned even closer, because this next part was going to be good. The central chamber was, to put it mildly, impressive, and to put it accurately, absolutely terrifying. The room was spherical, easily 100 meters in diameter, with walls that seemed to be made of condensed starlight. At the very center, suspended in midair by forces that made physics professors weep, hovered the core of ascension. It looked like someone had taken a sunset, compressed it into a crystal sphere about the size of a basketball, and taught it to glow with ominous intent. Beautiful, terrifying, probably going to kill them. The usual combination. Well, James said, his voice echoing in the vast space, that's definitely the thing we're supposed to grab. Astute observation, Captain Von Kalla replied dryly. Their compound eyes were scanning the chamber, looking for threats, which was wise, because threats were definitely incoming. You don't build an elaborate death maze and leave the final prize unguarded. Helmix was already running scans, his webbed fingers dancing through holographic displays. The energy signature is off the charts. This thing contains more concentrated knowledge than most planetary databases. His skin flickered to excited green before quickly shifting to worried yellow, which makes me very concerned about what's protecting it. As if on cue, because dramatic timing was apparently a universal constant, the Obelisk's voice returned. It resonated through the chamber, through their bones, through the fabric of reality itself. Calculating. Recalculating. Error. Insufficient data regarding species. Human. New holographic displays materialized around them, surrounding the crew in walls of shifting numbers and equations. James's readout appeared again, but this time instead of 0.0%, it simply read, "Error." "I broke it," James said, sounding oddly proud. "I broke an ancient superintelligence just by existing." "That's not necessarily a good thing," Willix chimed, her crystalline structure humming with anxiety. "Sure it is. If it can't predict me, it can't kill me." "Or," Helmix countered, his skin now full panic purple, "it will simply kill everything until you stop being a variable." The science officer's concern proved prophetic. The chamber shuddered, and from the walls emerged something that made everyone take an involuntary step backward. It was a construct, clearly mechanical but moving with organic fluidity, built from the same material as the obelisk itself, roughly humanoid in shape, standing maybe 3 meters tall, covered in weapon systems that looked like they could disassemble atoms if given half a chance. It was, in technical terms, a giant murder robot. "Guardian construct detected," the obelisk's voice announced helpfully. "Combat parameters. Eliminate all entities within chamber. Adaptation protocols. Active. Probability of survival." "Let me guess," James interrupted. 0%? Calculating. Error. Cannot establish baseline for human combat effectiveness. Defaulting to maximum threat response. "That's fair," James admitted. "I wouldn't know how to predict me in a fight either." The Guardian moved, and moved fast. One moment it was standing still. The next, it was in front of Captain Vonkala, arm raised for a strike that would have turned the captain into organic paste. But Vonkala was fast, too, their insectoid reflexes kicking in, dodging backward while deploying the plasma weapon they'd been carrying. The shot hit the Guardian square in the chest. The construct paused, analyzed the attack, and then its chest armor shifted, restructured, became reflective. The next plasma bolt bounced off harmlessly. "It's adapting," Vonkala hissed. "Real-time adaptation to combat strategies." Willix tried next, projecting a sonic frequency that could shatter most materials. The Guardian's audio receptors simply closed, filtering out the attack. When Helmix attempted to disable it with an electromagnetic pulse, the construct rerouted its systems, becoming immune within seconds. The thing was learning from every attack, becoming invulnerable to anything they tried. It was the ultimate combat AI, designed to counter every known fighting style in the galaxy, which meant James needed to do something unknown. The Guardian turned its attention to him, optical sensors focusing with predatory intensity. James could practically hear it running calculations, trying to predict his next move, build a counter-strategy, prepare for every possible attack pattern. James picked up a wrench from his tool belt and threw it at the thing's head. The Guardian froze. Actually froze, mid-step, like someone had paused it. Its sensors tracked the wrench, which bounced off its skull with a disappointing clang, then refocused on James with what might have been confusion. If murder robots could be confused. "Did you just," Helmix began, his skin a baffled orange, "did you just throw a wrench at the most advanced combat AI we've ever encountered?" Seemed like a good idea at the time. The Guardian resumed movement, but something was different. It was hesitating, processing, trying to categorize this new threat. James could see it in the way its stance kept shifting, unable to settle on a defensive posture because it couldn't predict what he'd do next. So James did the most unpredictable thing possible. He charged straight at it, screaming. Not a war cry, not a battle roar, just unintelligible screaming. The kind you make when you're absolutely terrified, but committed to being terrified at high velocity. The Guardian attempted to counter, raising its arm for a strike, but James slid between its legs, a move no tactical database would ever recommend, and came up behind it. The construct spun fast, but James was already moving again, this time pulling off his boot and throwing it. His boot hit the Guardian's optical sensor. The construct staggered, recalibrating. James used the opening to climb onto its back, which was either brilliant or suicidal, depending on your perspective. Probably both. Definitely both. "What are you doing?" Captain Von Kala shouted. "Improvising," James shouted back, wrapping his arms around the construct's neck while his bootless foot scrabbled for purchase. "It can't adapt to chaos if there's no pattern." The Guardian thrashed, trying to dislodge him, but James held on with the desperation of someone who'd already survived 3 impossible challenges and wasn't about to fail at the 4th. His free hand pulled out his multi-tool, and he started unscrewing access panels on the construct's back with single-minded determination. "This is insane," Helmix called out, though he sounded more impressed than critical. "You can't fight an adaptive AI with tactics," James grunted, avoiding a swipe that would have taken his head off. "You fight it with stupidity at maximum volume." He found what he was looking for, a power coupling, glowing with the same blue energy that permeated the Obelisk. Without hesitation, without even thinking about whether this was a good idea, James yanked it free. The Guardian froze. Really froze this time, all its systems shutting down simultaneously. It toppled forward like a felled tree, and James barely managed to jump clear before it hit the ground with a sound like a bank vault falling from orbit. Silence filled the chamber. James stood there, bootless, breathing hard, holding a power coupling that was still sparking with residual energy. The Obelisk's voice returned, and for the first time it sounded genuinely baffled. "Impossible. Combat analysis shows utilization of 43 distinct tactical approaches, none of which appear in any known combat database. Strategy classification, undefined. Threat assessment, undefined. Species human, redefined as incomprehensible variable." James dropped the power coupling and grinned. "Yeah, well, I was making it up as I went. You should try it sometime. Makes life more interesting." Captain Vunkala approached slowly, their antennae twitching in what James had learned was profound respect. "You just defeated an opponent that adapted to every conventional strategy by employing no strategy whatsoever. When you put it that way, it sounds almost smart. It was simultaneously the least tactical and most effective combat performance I've ever witnessed." "I'll take it," James said, then looked down at his remaining boot. "Though I'm going to need a new pair of shoes after this." The path to the core of Ascension was clear now. The Guardian defeated, the challenges overcome. The crystalline sphere hung in the air, waiting, pulsing with ancient knowledge and power beyond measure. James started walking toward it, limping slightly because fighting murder robots in one boot was rough on the ankles. But he was smiling, because against every prediction, every calculation, every probability assessment, he was still alive. And he was about to touch the universe's biggest prize. James reached for the core of Ascension, his fingers inches from the crystalline surface, when the Obelisk spoke. Again. But this time, its voice was different, softer, almost respectful. "Wait," James paused, hand outstretched. Waiting. This better be good. Analysis complete. Species human. Unprecedented. Explanation required. The holographic displays shifted, reforming into something resembling a historical database. Images flickered past. Thousands of species, thousands of attempts, all failures. The Obelisk had been testing civilizations for longer than most stars had been burning. For 3.8 million cycles, this facility has evaluated potential inheritors of the knowledge contained within the core of Ascension. All species followed predictable patterns. All failed the trials through logical, calculable behavior. And let me guess, James said, lowering his hand slightly. We're the first to make it this far? You are the first to survive past the second challenge. You are the first to defeat the Guardian construct. You are the first to exhibit behavior that defies probability matrices. Captain Von Kala stepped forward, their mandibles clicking with interest. Why did you calculate 0% survival for James specifically? Correction, the Obelisk replied. 0% was not a prediction of failure. It was a computational error. Human behavioral patterns do not exist within probability frameworks. The species operates outside calculable parameters. They are, in essence, chaos with thumbs. Hey, James protested. I resent that. We also have opposable thumbs. Helmix's skin flickered to thoughtful blue. So, the 0% wasn't because he would die. It was because you literally couldn't predict what he'd do. Affirmative. Human decision-making incorporates elements this system cannot process. Irrational hope, stubborn refusal to acknowledge limitations, and what databases classify as profound stupidity, masquerading as courage. That's the nicest thing an ancient AI has ever said about me, James said. The Obelisk continued, its tone shifting to something almost philosophical. The core of Ascension contains knowledge capable of advancing civilizations beyond current understanding, technologies that manipulate space, time, consciousness itself, power sufficient to reshape galaxies. Sounds heavy, James said. Previous recipients of this knowledge destroyed themselves within 6 generations. The burden of understanding proved catastrophic. Civilizations collapsed under the weight of capability exceeding wisdom. Willix's crystalline form dimmed slightly. Then, why offer it at all? Hope. The architects believed an inheritor would eventually emerge, a species capable of wielding knowledge without succumbing to it. After 3.8 million cycles, analysis suggests, humans may be uniquely qualified. Because we're unpredictable? James asked. Because you survive despite improbability. Because you improvise when logic fails. Because you threw footwear at an adaptive combat AI and won. The Obelisk paused. Because species that defy prediction may also defy the historical pattern of self-destruction. James stared at the core, then at his crew, then back at the glowing sphere. Everyone was waiting for him to grab it, to claim the prize they'd fought so hard to reach. Instead, he laughed. You know what? No. The chamber fell silent. Even the Obelisk seemed surprised. No? It echoed. No, James confirmed. Here's the thing. Your math said I had 0% chance of survival, and I'm standing here anyway. Maybe the lesson isn't that humans need your knowledge. Maybe it's that we're pretty good at figuring things out ourselves. Math be damned. Captain Von Kala's antennae shot straight up. James, this is knowledge that could advance humanity by millennia. Yeah, and apparently it also destroys civilizations. We've got enough problems without adding galaxy-reshaping power to the mix. James turned to face the Obelisk directly. How about instead of giving us all the answers, you just give us a heads up on what not to do? Like a cosmic warning label. Clarify request. Tell us which technologies definitely explode the universe. Which experiments summon things that shouldn't be summoned. The big red buttons we should absolutely not push. James shrugged. We'll figure out the rest. That's kind of our thing. The Obelisk processed this for a long moment. Then, impossibly, it seemed to laugh. Not audibly, but the chamber resonated with something that felt like amusement. Unexpected, unprecedented, acceptable. The core of Ascension pulsed once, and data streamed directly into their ship's computers. Not the knowledge itself, but warnings, cautionary tales, the collected mistakes of 1,000,000 dead civilizations. "Species human," the Obelisk said. "You have passed a test you did not know existed. Not by taking the prize, but by recognizing when to refuse it. The architects would be surprised, as am I." "Good," James said. "Surprising ancient AIs is my new hobby." They returned to the quantum meridian, with the Guardian construct still sparking behind them and James still missing one boot. The Obelisk remained in the void sector, still broadcasting its challenge to the cosmos, but with an addendum in its database. Species human. Probability calculations inadvisable. Recommend alternative assessment methods. Possibly recommend blast shields. Later, in the ship's mess hall, Helmix asked the question everyone was thinking. "Weren't you scared when it said 0%? James grinned, the same grin that had carried him through toxic atmospheres and gravity wells and murder robots. "Nah, 0% just means nobody's done it yet. And I've always wanted to be the first to do something monumentally stupid." He raised his drink, something vaguely blue that Willix had synthesized, in a toast. To bad odds, worse decisions, and the universal constant that is human stubbornness. The crew joined him, even Captain Von Kala, whose species didn't traditionally drink but made an exception. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Obelisk updated its files one final time. Note to future civilizations. Never bet against the species with duct tape, and zero sense of self-preservation. They will surprise you. They will survive. And they will absolutely throw their footwear at your best defenses. The galaxy had learned an important lesson that day. When humans are given 0% odds, they don't see a prediction. They see a challenge. And they've never been very good at backing down from those